Van Halen burst onto the scene with their 1978 debut album that established them as a powerhouse of hard rock, delivering an intense, high-energy sound throughout most of its tracks. But there was one song that was a little bit of a departure from this formula that showed off the versatility of the band. While it's one of Van Halen's most recognizable songs, it strangely enough never charted, even though it was released as a single. Then a decade later, another song sampled it and it nearly topped the charts. The sample created such a problem that guitarist Eddie Van Halen almost came to physical blows with the artist who sampled it. Like any band that has success with their first record, people are quick to point out how they must have been an overnight success, but in many cases, including Van Halen's, that wasn't true. Van Halen's origins began in the 60s with brothers Eddie and Alex. They formed their first band in elementary school called Broken Combs. In 1964, they played school functions and backyard parties, with Eddie even at one point fronting the group. They went through several monikers, including Trojan Rubber Company to Genesis and later Mammoth, after learning there already was a band named Genesis. By the early 70s, Mammoth changed their name to Van Halen, after discovering another band already had the name. Van Halen soon established their classic lineup with frontman David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen on guitar, Alex Van Halen on drums, and Michael Anthony on bass. Roth had auditioned several times for the group but was rejected, but he had a PA. But it was still years before they had their big break. They caught the attention of Kiss's Gene Simmons by 1976, and Simmons at one point tried to convince the band to change their name to Daddy Longlegs. Thankfully, they ignored that suggestion. Simmons ended up producing a nearly 30-song demo tape for the group. Despite Simmons' help, he couldn't help the band get a major recording contract or even get Kiss's own management to take them on as clients, as Gene Simmons' management told him that Van Halen had basically zero chance of making it. But it was a guy named Doug Messenger, Van Morrison's band leader, who knew a guy at Warner Brothers, an A&R guy and producer Ted Templeman. Templeman was on the lookout for a Guitar Hero type of band. Messenger had previously seen Van Halen in Hollywood and called Templeman to check the band out. It was on a rainy night in mid-77 that Ted Templeman and the chairman and CEO of Warner, Mo Ostin, took in Van Halen's performance at the Starwood. This represented the first time that Van Halen had actually hired roadies and wanting to look somewhat professional and classy. The audience that night was pretty small. It included a barmaid, Messenger, and the two guys from Warner Brothers. But Mo Ostin was so impressed by the band's performance that he wrote a letter of intent on a napkin from the club. In late August of 77, Van Halen retreated to Sunset Sound Recorders in Hollywood with $54,000 budget to record the album. It was produced by Ted Templeman and engineered by Don Landy. Landy told Van Halen News Desk they cut 28 tracks in about 2 hours. That's when we knew we had a band that could play. Rather than multi-tracking everything, the band was recorded playing live to tape, with Landy adding, "We spent very little time in pre-production. In fact, we treated the entire first album like it was a demo." The sessions concluded after about 5 weeks. Eddie added, "For the first record, we went into the studio one day and played live and laid down 40 songs. Out of those 40, we picked 9 and wrote one in the studio, Jamie's Cryin'." Warner issued the album in February of 78, and it represented what rock and roll used to be, a back-to-basics approach showcasing talent at a time when new wave was all the craze. The band kicked off a world tour in early 78 that saw them return to California by the summer of that year to play some local shows and headline. It was initially envisioned that Van Halen was going to be playing the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, which held about 3,000 people. But once the first single from the album, a cover of The Kinks' You Really Got Me, took off, the band's popularity swelled. The single peaked at number 36 on the Hot 100 chart. Van Halen was soon upgraded to playing the 5,500 seat configuration of the Long Beach Arena. But then the band's popularity kept taking off as they kept releasing singles. They were eventually upgraded to playing the 9,200 seat configuration of the same arena. But the band's manager was a little nervous at having so many possibly empty seats that he called the box office and learned that within the first 2 hours of the tickets going on sale, all the seats were sold out. In a funny twist, Eddie was disappointed that Warner Brothers issued a cover as the group's first single instead of an original tune. The Kinks' Dave Davies had claimed that he disliked Van Halen's rendition of their song, saying, "Good art isn't always about having the comfiest technique. I shouldn't encourage him, but I'm sure Eddie Van Halen played better when he was drunk." He even recalled how one concert goer approached him at a show and congratulated the band on performing a great cover of the Van Halen song. His brother Ray, however, claimed to have been a fan of the cover. Van Halen's debut record produced several other big singles, and not just some of the band's best-known songs, but some of the best-known rock songs in history. The second single, Runnin' with the Devil, which some thought was about the actual devil, peaked at number 84 on the Hot 100. It's actually about the life of a traveling rock band and the simple life. The band had several other follow-up singles with Ain't Talkin' About Love and Jamie's Cryin', both of which, strangely enough, never charted in America. Jamie's Cryin' was the only song the band wrote after they got signed with Warner Brothers in the studio. Roth recalled hearing Eddie come up with a guitar part for the song. "We heard Edward fooling around with his guitar between takes, and we yelled, 'Hey man, that's just what we need on the album.'" According to Templeman, when it was time to record the song, the band had most of the melody completed, but not the melody for the bridge, and none of the lyrics were written yet. Templeman recalled hearing Eddie play a two-note lick that sounded like somebody crying. It gave frontman David Lee Roth an idea to write lyrics about a high school romance that didn't last. A girl likes a guy, but before going all the way, she wants to get to know him, and then he loses interest. The lyrics took an ironic meaning, considering that David Lee Roth was set to be quite the coxman back in the day. Roth claimed he came up with the guitar solo, vocalizing how it should sound to Eddie. Jamie's Cryin' was one of several songs on their debut album that used overdubs. The band shot a video for the song at the Whiskey in the spring of '78. Roth recalled recording the song in his book Crazy from the Heat. "I went out and sat in a little basketball court area outside the studio. I ate half a cheeseburger and drained a soda pop and smoked half a joint. Walked in, knocked out Jamie's Cryin' in 40 minutes. Within its first year of sales, the group's debut album sold 2 million copies, and the band toured with some high-profile acts, including Black Sabbath. The album later went on to be certified diamond, selling over 10 million copies. Then a decade later, a song that sampled Jamie's Cryin' landed at the number 2 spot on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. That song was Wild Thing by grovelly voiced hip-hop artist Tone Loc. Loc was working on his debut record at the time, and he co-wrote the song with Marvin Young, also known as Young MC, best known for the song Bust a Move. Just bust a move. The song was also co-written with producer Matt Dyke and Michael Ross. According to producer Michael Ross, he came up with the title from the Spike Lee movie She's Gotta Have It. He asked Young MC to write the lyrics, and Tone Loc sang it. By 1989, rap rock was becoming more popular, as Run DMC had reimagined Walk This Way with Aerosmith a couple years earlier, and of course you had Beastie Boys. While it's been misrepresented by some that rapper Tone Loc stole the sample of Jamie's Cryin', he actually didn't. His people contacted Van Halen's management, who licensed the sample for a flat fee, which was set to be about $5,000. Van Halen's management at the time didn't really think much of the song and didn't realize it was going to later become a hit. It was apparently producer and songwriter Matt Dyke who thought of the idea for using Jamie's Cryin' in Wild Thing. Loc told Billboard, "If it wasn't for Matt, that wouldn't have blown up. He had a great year for rock and roll. I never heard Jamie's Cryin' or anything like that. I heard of Van Halen, of course, and heard certain songs, but I didn't know about that tune or that guitar riff. So he just blended it so perfect." The problem with Van Halen started because their management never told the members about the sample request. It wasn't until Eddie and his brother Alex heard Wild Thing that they got upset about Jamie's Cryin being sampled. Eddie apparently saw the video on MTV, and Alex heard it on the radio one day, recognizing his Tom intro fill from the song was being sampled. The story sometimes gets painted as rappers using samples without permission. Now, in the 80s, sampling was relatively new. It was something that the courts hadn't really had much experience with. I would compare it to today, how we hear about AI, or more specifically, generative AI. Right now, there's something in the order of 24 lawsuits going on regarding generative AI. Some of these lawsuits include AI creating photos or images, and these models are trained on using copyright images to generate something new. There was one article written about Tone Loc in 1989 that claimed that artists like him were basically plagiarizing. The author wrote, "Do we need to protect musicians from thieves?" Going on to add, "Should there be copyright laws on what musicians sample with their digital samplers?" Getting permission to sample artists' music wasn't something that everybody did in the 80s. Lawsuits started getting filed by musicians who claimed that their copyright had been infringed on by other artists. In the case of Van Halen, they were not happy that Tone Loc had sampled Jamie's Cryin and threatened the rapper with legal action. They eventually settled out of court, with the rapper having to pay somewhere in the range of $180,000 to $200,000, and the members also got writing credits on the song Wild Thing, and they also got royalties going forward. Loc admitted that he ended up coming face to face with Eddie Van Halen years later, telling Billboard, "I ran into Eddie Van Halen one time. He was uptight and a little tipsy, claiming that I took money from him. I don't think he really believed that, but maybe he did because he was tipsy, and you say what you feel when you're in that zone. Maybe he didn't get the proper royalties for it. I don't know. He's lucky I didn't sock him in his jaw, but I was chillin'." Loc's debut record, which contained Wild Thing, went double platinum, as did the single. Wild Thing has since been licensed for countless movies and TV shows and placed number 39 on VH1's list of 100 greatest hip-hop songs. Let's do the wild thing. Weird Al even later parodied Wild Thing with his version called I'll Thing. It was actually his first rap parody of his career. Well, I'm watching that kid against I'll Thing. I'll Thing. Tone Loc had another big hit on the same album with Funky Cold Medina, which peaked at number 3 on the Hot 100 chart. That's the guy. It also sampled a number of rock songs, including Foreigner's Hot Blooded, Get Off Your Ass and Jam by Funkadelic. It samples 2 Stone songs, including Satisfaction and Honky Tonk Woman, Christine 16 by Kiss, All Right Now by Free, and You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet by Bachman Turner Overdrive. Years later, Jamie's Cryin would be featured in Howard Stern's 1997 movie Private Parts, and it was also included on the film's soundtrack. It was also later featured on the video game as an on-disc track for Guitar Hero Van Halen. As for Tone Loc, he has only ever released 2 studio records. He went on to produce other artists and also acted in films and television. In more recent years, he's had numerous run-ins with the law. Tone Loc did give an interview to the Phoenix New Times in 1989 and was probably the first time he discussed the whole Van Halen ripoff claim. He added that while him and his producers may have sampled some of Jamie's Cryin, the rest of the guitar part was actually a new interpretation of Van Halen's work, adding, "We just funked it up. One thing that is very hard to do is copyright. You can use anything from 7, 8, 9 bars. Once you get beyond that point, you get in trouble." He added that he prefers Wild Thing over Jamie's Cryin, adding that the sampling of the song introduced Van Halen to a whole new audience, adding, "They're certainly not poor by any means. They're big squirrels with all the nuts. I'm just a little squirrel trying to get a nut." Alex Van Halen was later quoted about the whole settlement, stating, "Well, at least we got something. Tone Loc and his people made millions out of it." That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.